Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, I want you to do something for me, just for a second. Close your eyes.
Right.
I want you to imagine you're standing in a room. But this isn't just any room. It feels like it spans two completely different eras, two different worlds almost.
Okay. Yeah,
And
thank you.
on one side, picture this ancient, dimly lit library. I'm talking heavy, massive stone walls. You can feel the cold coming off them. You can see dust motes just dancing in these little shafts of light. And you can hear that sound, that heavy grinding sound of huge leather-bound books being opened.
Yeah.
You know, the sound of centuries of tradition.
Right. I can almost smell the old paper.
Exactly. But then on the other side of this very same room, imagine a futuristic server farm. Totally sterile, clean, humming with that high-frequency vibration of a processing unit that just never, ever sleeps.
That is quite the juxtaposition.
It is, isn't it? But that's exactly where we are today, because we're looking at a text, the Qur'an, which claims to be, in a sense, a perfect operating system for humanity. It says it's built on an architecture of absolute justice. But for 1,400 years, there has been this massive, flashing error message right in the middle of the screen, a single line of code that seems to crash the entire system.
And we are not talking about a minor bug here. This isn't, a small debate over some minor ritual. We are talking about a directive that directly impacts half of the entire human population. We are talking about Surah 4, verse 34.
The infamous wife-beating verse.
The one.
Yes.
Right. If you go and pull almost any standard English translation off the shelf, I mean, you can grab a Pictol, a Yusuf Ali, the Halali Khan version you'll find in, most mosques. You will find a command addressed to men regarding their wives. And that command is very clearly, beat them.
And it is so jarring. I mean, here you have this book that on almost every other page describes the creator as the most merciful, the most compassionate. And then, bang, you hit this command that sounds like it belongs in a brutal pre-civilizational warlord's manual or something. It feels like a glitch.
A fatal syntax error.
That's it. A fatal syntax error in the logic of justice.
Exactly. And that is really the core premise of our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at the work of J.R. Ahmed, specifically his dossier, The Qur'an and the Myth of Wife Beating. And what he proposes is, well, it's pretty radical. He argues that this command, beat them, is not actually in the source code at all.
Not in the original code.
Not in the original. He argues it's a virus that's been introduced by the users, a mistranslation that has been replicated, copied, and pasted for over a millennium.
And what I absolutely love about Ahmed's approach, and why I'm so excited to really unpack this with you, is that he doesn't just come at this from an emotional place. He's not just saying, well, that's mean and I don't like it. He puts on a detective hat. He becomes a linguistic forensic analyst.
Right.
He uses linguistics, he uses physiology of all things, and he uses what you and I have been calling system logic to prove that the traditional interpretation is, in his words, impossible.
And that is the key word, impossible. Not just, distasteful or problematic for a modern audience. He's saying it is logically inconsistent with the rest of the text. If you view the Qur'an as this coherent architectural structure, a command to abuse your partner, it's like knocking out all the load-bearing walls. The whole thing just collapses in on itself.
So that's our mission for today. We're going to run a diagnostic. We're going to trace the evolution of a single crucial Arabic verb Dharb. We're going to dig into the biology of divorce waiting periods, believe it or not.
Yeah.
We're going to look at the grammar of obedience. And we're going to see if we can actually debug a 1,400-year-old error.
And I think it is important to say right at the top, this matters. This matters whether you are a believer, a skeptic, or, just someone who is interested in how ideas shape history, because it raises a massive question about authority. Do we follow the text as it was written? Or do we follow the tech support guys, the scholars, the translators who've been interpreting the manual for us all this time?
So where do we even begin with something this big?
Well, Ahmed starts us off not in a dictionary, but with a thought experiment. Before we even touch a single Arabic word, he wants us to use our own logic.
Okay, let's jump into the first major section of his evidence then. J.R. Ahmed calls this the logical paradox. He sets up what he terms a reverse engineering thought experiment.
Which is a standard stress test in any kind of system analysis. It's a brilliant way to start. If a rule is truly universal and just, which, divine law always claims to be, it should hold up when you invert the variables.
They flip it.
You flip it. If the logic breaks when you flip the gender, you have to ask yourself why. There's a flaw in the system.
So let's walk through the specific scenarios he proposes. Scenario A, He points us to a different chapter, Surah 24, verse 30. This is a very well-known verse. It's the one that commands believing men to lower their gaze and guard their modesty. It is a command about inner character, about discipline.
Right. It's an explicit check on male behavior, a clear directive from God to men.
Okay, so Ahmed paints a picture for us. Imagine a husband is at home, sitting on the couch. He's just watching TV. An advertisement comes on, or a movie, and a stunning actress appears on screen. And he stares. He just sits there and gawks.
Yeah.
He is objectively, undeniably violating the command to lower his gaze. He's breaking a Quranic injunction.
No question about it.
The question Ahmed then poses is this: does the wife get to beat him?
And in every single school of traditional Islamic law, the answer is a resounding, absolute, unequivocal no. It's not even a debate.
Well, why not? I mean, he broke the rule. The system has been violated.
Yeah. Well, the traditional argument you'd hear would be something about, the man having authority, or that his particular infraction is between him and God, not for her to enforce. But if you look at it purely from a systems perspective, as Ahmed does, that's a massive failure of logic. If physical punishment is the prescribed tool for correction in this marriage, why is that tool only available to one of the users?
The access is restricted.
It's a one-way street, and that's a bug, not a feature.
He takes it even further with his scenario B. And this one hits even closer to the verse we're actually discussing. So Surah 4.34, the same verse, says men are Qawwamoona. We'll get to the deep translation of that later. But essentially, it's always translated as maintainers or supporters. They're supposed to spend of their wealth on the family. That is their primary job description in this framework.
Correct. Financial support is the #1 obligation of the husband in this legal system. It's his core function.
So Ahmed asks, what if the husband is a deadbeat? What if he's just incredibly stingy? What if, and he writes this in a really vivid way, what if he makes his wife work like a slave, think like a slave, and act like a slave while he just hoards all the money for himself? He is actively, flagrantly violating his primary function as defined by the text.
He's in complete breach of contract.
Exactly. So does she get to beat him then?
Again, you just get crickets. Silence from the traditional scholars. There is no clause anywhere in Sharia law that says, if thy husband is stingy, get thee a stick. And this points to a huge theological inconsistency that Ahmed really drills down on. If you look at another verse, Surah 11, verse 5, it says, God knows what is enshrouded in their hearts.
So God knows everything, the inner thoughts, the intentions.
Everything. God is fully aware of human vanity, of greed, of arrogance, of the potential for tyranny in men. The system knows this. So if God knows men are capable of being tyrants and God is fundamentally just, why would God design a system where the tyrant is immune to physical correction, but the potential victim, the wife, is subject to it?
It would imply that God is biased toward the male.
Precisely. And that fundamentally contradicts the core definition of God in the text as Alal, the just. It violates this concept Ahmed calls the believer's mirror. The text often describes believers as mirrors to one another. We reflect each other's flaws so we can improve.
I see a flaw in you. I gently point it out so you can fix it.
Right. It's a system of mutual support. But if the system allows one person to just shatter the mirror with a fist whenever they don't like their own reflection, the system is broken. It serves the ego, not justice.
There's one more scenario he brings up, and it's about the dowry. Surah 4, verse 4 says to give women their sadaqat, their marital gifts, freely, as a gift. But we know, historically and even today in many cultures, it's the groom or his family that demands a dowry from the bride's family. It's a complete reversal of the Quranic flow of wealth.
A direct, unambiguous violation of the text.
So if the groom shows up and demands money from the bride's father, does the bride's father then get to beat him for breaking the rule?
Of course not. It's unthinkable. And so the conclusion J.R. Ahmed draws from all this is blunt. He's not mincing words. He says believing that God ordained this one-way street of violence is unreasonable, nonsense, and illogical.
So his point isn't just beating is bad.
No, it's deeper. His point is injustice is impossible for God. So if your interpretation of the text leads you to a conclusion that is fundamentally unjust, the problem isn't with God. The problem is with your interpretation. We have to look at the text again.
Which brings us right to the text itself. It's time to actually debug the code. But Ahmed says you can't just, zoom in on the one-word beat. You have to look at the entire sentence structure. You have to look at the hierarchy that sets up the beating in the first place. He calls this the trinity of deviant misunderstanding.
It's a stack of errors. You can think of it like a cascading failure in a computer program. Error number 1 leads to error number 2, which makes error number 3 seem logical.
What are the 3 errors?
Error 1. The idea that men are masters or are somehow superior to women, error 2. The idea that women must be obedient to these masters, and error 3. If they aren't obedient, the master has the right to beat them. You simply cannot fix error 3 until you've completely dismantled error 1.
Okay, so let's tackle error 1. The word in the verse is Qawwamoona. I have the Yusuf Ali translation right here in front of me. It's one of the most common ones. It reads, "Men are the protectors and maintainers of women." Other translations I've seen say men are in charge of women. It immediately sets up a kind of boss-employee relationship.
Or even a commander-private relationship, a clear hierarchy. But let's do what the translators maybe didn't. Let's look at the root of the word, QWM.
Qawwamoona.
Right. And across the Arabic language, this root implies standing up for, attending to a need, maintaining something. It is a functional word, a word about doing a job. It is not a status word. Ahmed argues, and he's really backed by the lexicon here, that Qawwamoona refers to a very specific duty, the duty of providing livelihood.
So it's really about money,
Right.
about being the provider.
It's about support, but yes, financial support specifically. Look at how the verse continues. It doesn't just say men are Qawwamoona, full stop. It gives the reason. Men are Qawwamoona over women because they spend of their property.
Ah, so the role is directly linked to the financial contribution.
It is entirely contingent upon it. It's not saying men are smarter or holier or better leaders by nature. It is saying, in the functional design of this family structure, the man has the obligation to provide the resources. It's his part of the deal.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it just means provider, doesn't the one who pays the bills usually get to make the rules? I mean, in our world, if I'm the maintainer, doesn't that inherently give me a degree of authority?
That is the modern capitalist assumption, isn't it? He who has the gold makes the rules. But the Quranic model is explicitly different. This is where you have to cross-reference the code. Look at Surah 4, verse 32.
Okay, I've got it right here. "And in no wise covet those things in which Allah hath bestowed his gifts more freely on some of you than on others. To men is allotted what they earn, and to women what they earn. So men shall have a portion of what they earn, and women shall have a portion of what they earn."
Think about how revolutionary that was in the 7th century. It established women as completely independent economic entities. They own their property. They keep their own money. The husband has a booty to support the family from his wealth, but he has zero claim on his wife's wealth.
So Qawwamoona isn't, "I own you because I feed you."
No. It is, I serve the family unit by providing for it, so that you are free to do other essential things, like, for instance, bearing and raising children, which is a form of labor the man is biologically incapable of doing. It's a division of labor, not a hierarchy of power. It's a partnership.
But the traditionalists, I mean, the guys who've been running this code for 1,000 years, they always have a comeback.
Yeah.
And they immediately point to another verse, Surah 2, verse 228.
I know the one.
It says, "And women shall have rights similar to the rights against them, according to what is equitable." And then it comes, the kicker. "But men have a degree over them," the daraja.
The degree. Oh, the daraj. This is the verse that gets thrown around every single time someone wants to shut down a conversation about equality in Islam.
Yeah.
Look, God himself says we have a degree. We are level 2. You are level 1. End of discussion.
Right. I mean, it sounds pretty definitive. Men have a degree over them. How does J.R. Ahmed get around something that seems so explicit?
He doesn't get around it. He dives right into the biology of it. And this was, honestly, my favorite part of his entire analysis because it's so incredibly empirical. You don't need theology. You just need to look at the context of the verse. What is Surah 2.228 actually talking about? Is it talking about leadership, prayer, intelligence?
No, it's about divorce.
Exactly. The entire passage is about the rules of divorce, specifically the Ida, or the waiting period after a divorce.
Okay, so what's the rule?
The verse says that if a couple divorces, the woman must wait for a period of 3 quru, which means 3 menstrual cycles, or roughly 3 months before she is legally allowed to remarry.
And why is that? Why the wait?
It's purely to determine paternity. In a world without DNA test kits, this was a crucial legal safeguard. If a woman gets divorced and then remarries the very next day, and then 9 months later has a baby, who is the father? Is it the first husband or the second? That confusion destroys lineage. It creates chaos regarding inheritance, responsibility, and the child's identity.
Okay, that makes perfect biological and legal sense. The woman waits for 3 cycles. If she menstruates 3 times, it confirms she wasn't pregnant from the first marriage, and she's free to marry someone else.
Now for the critical question. Does the man have to wait 3 months?
No. He can remarry immediately.
Why not?
Because Well, because they can't get pregnant. Biologically, there's no ambiguity. Even if he remarries the next day, there's no confusion about his paternity.
Bingo. That is the degree. That is the daraja. That is the advantage. Men have a logistical, biological advantage specifically within the legal process of divorce. They don't have a waiting period because they don't have a uterus. That is all the text is saying.
That just blows my mind. So for centuries, men have been reading men have a degree over them and puffing out their chests thinking it means I'm inherently better or I am the boss. But what the text is actually saying is, congratulations, you don't get pregnant, so you don't have to wait 3 months before remarrying.
It is a simple physiological observation that has been corrupted and weaponized into a tool of theological subjugation. Ahmed's point is that the system of the Quran is just protecting the child's lineage. It's an architectural safeguard for the family. It's not a statement on the inherent value of the woman's soul or her intellect.
Wow. So if the degree is just biology and being the maintainer is just a financial duty, then that whole master-slave dynamic completely starts to crumble, which I guess brings us to the second bug in this trinity of misunderstandings, the idea of obedience.
Right, because if he isn't the master, then why on earth does she have to be obedient to him?
So let's look at the verse again, 4.34. In the traditional translation, it says, "Therefore the righteous women are devoutly obedient and guard in the husband's absence what Allah would have them guard." And almost always in the translations, the words "to their husbands" are put in brackets right after the word obedient.
And those little brackets are doing a phenomenal amount of heavy lifting. They are inserting a meaning that simply is not in the original Arabic text. The word that's used there is quanitatun.
Qanitatun. Okay, so if we're debugging the code, we need to run a search on this variable. Let's look at the entire database of the Qur'an. Every single time this word, or its root, appears, what does it mean?
And when you do that, it creates what Ahmed calls a universal code, a consistent definition. And every other time qanitatun, or its root QNT, is used in the Quran, it refers to being obedient, devout, and humble to God. It describes a spiritual posture of silence, devotion, and standing before the divine. It never, not once, refers to a human being obeying another human being.
And Ahmed brings two pieces of evidence to prove this, and they're devastating to the traditional view. Case study number 1, Mary and the mother of Jesus.
Yes. Surah 3, verse 43. The angels come to Mary, and they say to her, "O Mary, be quanti to your Lord." Now, think about this logically. Mary was a consecrated virgin. She lived in the temple. She had no husband. She had no father in the picture. She had no man in charge of her in any conventional sense.
So it was physically impossible for her to be obedient to her husband.
Completely impossible. The command could only have meant one thing: be devout to God. So if your definition of quanitatun is obedient to husband, then the verse about Mary, one of the most revered women in the text, makes zero sense. The code breaks.
Then there is case study 2, which I found even funnier in a sort of dark, ironic way. Surah 33, verse 35. It's a long list of virtues describing righteous people.
Right, it's this beautiful rhythmic verse.
It says, the Muslim men and Muslim women, the believing men and believing women, and then it goes on, listing pairs. Then it says, the men who are quanitin and the women who are quanitet.
And this is the empiricist's proof, right here. It's an undeniable data point. If quanitat means obedient to a spouse, then this verse is commanding men to be obedient to, well, to whom? Their wives.
That would certainly be a plot twist in the patriarchal reading.
It would completely contradict their entire framework. You cannot have it both ways. You can't say, well, when the word applies to women, it means obey your husband. But when it applies to men in the very same list, it magically transforms to mean obey God. That is changing the definition of a variable midcode. It's logically incoherent.
It's inconsistent syntax.
Exactly. Therefore, the variable quanitatun must have a single constant value throughout the entire operating system, and that value is devout to God. So Surah 4.34 isn't saying righteous women obey their husbands. It is saying righteous women are devout to God.
That completely changes the entire flavor of the verse. It's no longer about a domestic hierarchy. It's just a description of what a good, pious person does. They are devout to God.
But the developers of the traditional code, the scholars, they have one last line of defense before we get to the beating. Later in the verse, when it's talking about the women who are rebellious, it says, if they return to obedience, seek not against them away.
Yes. That phrase, return to obedience. This is what Ahmed calls the return to error. The Arabic phrase is fa'in atanakum.
Okay, so let's unpack that. The verb atanakum doesn't mean return to a state of submission. The root implies a mutual yielding. It's used in contexts of agreement or listening or coming to terms with someone. The phrasing return to obedience is an interpretation, an interpolation, added by translators specifically to force that master-slave dynamic back into the text. Ahmed argues the text actually says something far more reciprocal, like, if they then pay heed to you, or if they come to an agreement with you.
So it's about conflict resolution, not subjugation.
Yes. It's horizontal, not vertical. It implies we were in conflict and now we are listening to each other again and have reached a resolution. It is not, I was rebelling against my master and now I am submitting to his will again. The traditional translation fabricates a hierarchy that the actual Arabic lexicon just doesn't support.
This is incredible. Okay, so we have dismantled the idea of the master. We've dismantled the requirement of obedience to a husband. So now we are standing in front of that final, ugly door, the command itself. Because even if we agree that men aren't masters and women don't have to obey them, the text still seems to say, as for those on whose part you fear rebellion, admonish them, separate from them in bed, and beat them.
This brings us to section 4, the linguistic smoking gun. This is where we have to put the verb dharb itself under the microscope.
Dharb. The root is delraba. Now, I have looked at the dictionary pages that Ahmed provides in his work. This word it's a mess. It's a complete chameleon.
It is genuinely one of the most versatile and polysemous verbs in the entire Arabic language. It's a lot like the English word strike.
Right, I was thinking about that. I can strike a match to make a fire. I can strike a pose for a photo. I can strike a deal with a business partner. I can go on strike from my job. I can strike out in baseball. The word means something different in every single one of those contexts.
And if I said to you, host, I need you to strike the road, would you go outside and start punching the pavement?
No, of course not. I would leave. I would get on my way, start a journey, travel.
Exactly. And in the Qur'an, the word dharb is used in precisely that way, multiple times. Surah 4, verse 101 says, when you dharb in the earth, which all translators agree means when you travel. Or look at Surah 43, verse 5. It asks rhetorically, should we then dharb the reminder away from you? Which clearly means, should we withdraw it or separate the reminder from you?
Okay, so just off the top of my head, we have beat, strike, travel, exit, separate, withdraw, set an example. We have all these options on the table. So how do we know which one belongs in this specific verse, Surah 4.34? The traditionalists have a simple answer. Well, obviously in the context of a wife who is misbehaving, it means hit her.
But does that actually fit the context? This is where we have to apply what Ahmed calls algorithmic logic. Look at the sequence of actions prescribed in the verse. It outlines a very clear 3-step process for dealing with nushuz.
And nushuz is usually translated as rebellion or ill conduct.
Or a severe marital breakdown, a serious state of discord. So step 1, fa'izuhuna. Admonish them, talk to them, open a channel of communication.
Okay, that's peaceful, that's rational, a good first step.
Step 2, wajruhuna fil madaji. Abandon them in their beds. This is a cooling off period. You stop sleeping together, you take a break from intimacy to let tempers cool down. It is a passive action. It's about creating distance.
So we have talk, which is verbal engagement. Then we have separate beds, which is a kind of passive physical separation.
And then we get to step 3, wajrubuhuna. Now let's use logic. If step 1 is trying to fix the problem with words, and step 2 is de-escalating the conflict by creating distance, why in the name of logic would step 3 be punch her in the face?
It's a massive, sudden escalation. It goes completely against the grain of the first 2 steps.
It completely reverses the flow. The algorithm goes from peace distance, sudden extreme violence. And think about the goal of the whole process. The goal is reconciliation. If you talk to your wife and that doesn't work, and you sleep on the couch for a week and that doesn't work, and then you beat her, is she now suddenly going to want to reconcile with you?
No, that's the end of the marriage. That's trauma. That's a police matter.
Exactly. The action achieves the exact opposite of the system's stated goal. It causes a fatal crash. But now let's try something. Let's unplug the beat definition and plug in the other definition of dharb, the one that's used elsewhere in the Quran, meaning to separate or to part ways. Now what does the sequence look like?
Okay, let's trace it. Step 1, talk to each other. Step 2, sleep apart, a temporary in-house separation. Step 3, dharb separate completely.
Move out, a formal legal separation, the timeout theory. It now becomes a perfectly logical progression of increasing distance. 1, verbal engagement to solve the problem. 2, if that fails, physical distance within the bedroom. 3, if that fails, geographical distance, a trial separation. You are slowly, methodically decoupling to see if the marriage can be saved or if it needs to end civilly.
That actually flows perfectly. It feels like a modern, rational legal procedure. Talk, cooling off period, separation.
It makes the system consistent, the glitch disappears, the text isn't commanding abuse, it is providing a legal and psychological mechanism for de-escalation. The user, the translator, chose the word beat because of their own cultural bias, their own patriarchal worldview, not because the system required it.
It's just incredible how a single word choice, a single translation decision, can completely change the entire moral landscape of religion for billions of people. But, expert, we have to address the elephant in the room now. Or maybe the library in the room. Because J.R. Ahmed isn't just fighting a dictionary definition here. He's fighting 14 centuries of history.
He is fighting the Hadith.
Section 5. The corrupted files. Now, for any of our listeners who might not be familiar, the Hadith are the recorded sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad. They were collected, a couple hundred years after his death. And for the vast majority of traditional Muslims, these are the essential user manual that explains how to apply the Qur'an. You can't just throw them out.
Well, the rationalist, as you call me, would argue that if the user manual directly contradicts the core operating system, you have to trust the OS. And Ahmed's argument is that the Hadith literature is absolutely full of what he calls corrupted files narratives that portray a deeply misogynistic culture that directly clashes with the Quran's stated principles of justice and mercy.
And some of the ways that modern scholars have tried to reconcile this are, honestly, they're a bit embarrassing. Ahmed has a great name for it. Toothbrush apologetics.
Oh, this is the classic defense. You will hear this from almost every modern apologist when you corner them on this verse. They know beat your wife sounds terrible in the 21st century. So they go hunting in the Hadith and find a report where the Prophet allegedly said beat them, but not severely. Or they'll reference some early scholars who said you should only hit them with a siwak.
And a siwak is what?
It's a small stick, a twig really, that's used for cleaning teeth, like a natural toothbrush.
So the modern argument is, yes, God said beat them, but what he really meant was, just tap them lightly with a toothbrush to show you're displeased.
Which J.R. Ahmed finds absolutely profoundly absurd, and he mocks this mercilessly in his book, and rightly so. First of all, the word toothbrush is not in the Qur'an. The text says Dharb. Second, think about the sheer indignity of it. A grown woman, her husband in a moment of anger, hitting her with a toothbrush. It's infantilizing, it's humiliating. It treats her like a misbehaving child or a pet.
And it doesn't solve the core logical problem. It's still an act of physical discipline, of violence, however light.
It's a desperate, face-saving attempt to keep the word beat in the translation while trying to strip it of its violent implications, but the result is just nonsense. If the toothbrush tap isn't painful, it's not a deterrent. If it is painful, it's abuse. The toothbrush theory is a complete logical dead end.
But it gets much, much darker than toothbrushes.
Yeah.
Ahmed then opens up the external hard drive, the canonical Hadith collections of Bukhari and Muslim, and he reads out the files that show real brutal abuse. And these are tough to listen to.
They are graphic, but we need to confront them to understand why Ahmed is so insistent that they must be rejected.
Okay, there's the green veil story. It's a famous or infamous Hadith. A woman comes to Aisha, who is the Prophet's wife. She's wearing a green veil. But when she lifts the veil, the narration says her skin was greener than her clothes. She is covered in deep, dark bruises. She has been beaten black and blue by her husband.
A clear, unambiguous case of severe domestic violence. And what happens in the story? Does the Prophet order the husband to be arrested and lashed? Does he dissolve the marriage immediately on grounds of cruelty?
No. The narrative gets really strange. It devolves into this weird discussion about her previous husband and whether she can remarry him. And it uses this bizarre sexual metaphor about tasting the honey. It's baffling. The horrific violence that brought her there is treated as almost a background detail.
It paints a picture of a society where this level of domestic violence was visible, it was brutal, and it was essentially managed rather than outlawed. The system's response wasn't, this must stop, but okay, how do we navigate the legalities around this situation?
Then you have the stallion-camel contradiction. In one hadith, a very famous one, the Prophet asks, how can any of you whip his wife like he whips a stallion camel and then embrace her and sleep with her later that night?
Which sounds like a powerful condemnation. It sounds like the Prophet is pointing out the sheer absurdity and hypocrisy of it. This is insane behavior.
Right, it sounds like a clear prohibition. But then you pull up another file from a different collection, Abu Dawood, and it quotes the Prophet as saying, a man will not be asked, as to why he beat his wife.
And that is what Ahmed calls the devil's logic. That single line, "a man will not be asked," creates a zone of absolute terrifying impunity. It tells every man, what happens behind your closed doors is your business. God won't ask, and the law won't ask. It's a blank check for abuse.
So how does J.R. Ahmed and the rationalist perspective in general deal with these? You have one file that seems to say, don't whip her like a camel, and another that says, nobody has the right to even ask him why he hit her. The system is glitching. It's giving contradictory outputs.
Ahmed's solution is the delete button. He argues that these narratives are, quite simply, fabrications. He cites Surah 7, verse 162, which talks about wrongdoers who changed the word for another word. He argues that the Quranic system is one of affection and mercy. That's a direct quote from Surah 30, verse 21. Therefore, any file, any report, any hadith that contradicts affection and mercy is, by definition, malware. It's a virus that was introduced by a patriarchal, tribal culture to justify their own pre-Islamic behavior and sanctify it with the Prophet's name.
So he refuses to twist the Qur'an to make it fit with the hadith. He's willing to throw out the hadith in order to save the integrity of the Qur'an.
Precisely. He argues that for the system of justice to work, these corrupted files have to be quarantined and ignored. You cannot reconcile beat them with live with them in affection and mercy. It's a binary choice. Either the core operating system is one of mercy or it is one of abuse. It cannot be both.
This brings us to the final and maybe most hopeful section, recompiling the system. If we accept Ahmed's diagnosis, if we delete the master definition, if we delete the obedience to husband requirement, if we fix the translation of Dharb to mean separate, and if we ignore the abusive hadith, what does the operating system actually look like when it's running clean?
It looks like a partnership, a
Yeah.
true partnership. And this is the beautiful part of his work. If you strip away all the layers of corrupting tradition, you get to see the original code. And it's stunning. Look at Surah 9, verse 71.
Okay, let me pull that up. The believers, men and women, are alia one of another.
Alia, what does that word mean? It means protectors, allies, friends, guardians. And note the syntax. It is so crucial. It does not say men are the protectors of women. It says they're protectors one of another. It is mutual. It is reciprocal. It is a shield wall where both partners stand side by side, protecting each other from the world.
And Ahmed connects this back to that warning he has for the developers, for the scholars. He quotes Surah 4, verse 123. It is not your wishful thinking, nor the wishful thinking of the people of the book.
He is essentially warning them, just because you want to be the master, just because you wish for a religion that puts you on a pedestal and gives you power, that doesn't mean God wrote it that way.
Yep.
He argues that the true spousal code is found in Surah 30, verse 21, that spouses were created for sakina, which is comfort and tranquility, mawada, a deep, abiding love, and rahma, mercy and kindness.
So let's make this practical. In the J.R. Ahmed version of the operating system, the clean install, if a marriage is falling apart, if there is nushuz, rebellion, severe discord, what happens?
No violence, no light beating, no toothbrushes.
You talk, you communicate like adults, you seek counsel.
If that fails, you separate within the home. You create space. You cool off.
You Dharb, you separate. You initiate the formal divorce proceedings or a legal separation. You go to the courts. You involve arbitrators from both families, as the verse goes on to recommend. The husband is not the judge, the jury, and executioner. He is one partner in a contract who is either trying to repair the contract or, as a last resort, leave it civilly.
It seems so blindingly obvious when you lay it out like that. The degree is biological. The man doesn't have a uterine waiting period for divorce. The obedience is to God. Both partners bow to the same divine laws. And the beating is actually separation, a civil, sane way to end a toxic situation.
It is logically consistent. It is architecturally sound. And most importantly, it aligns with the stated character of a merciful, just creator. The system works.
But it does leave us with a pretty heavy realization. We're at the end of this deep dive, and frankly, I feel this strange mix of relief and anger. Relief that the text itself might be innocent of this charge, but anger because we have just traced a 1,400-year-old error.
It's a very heavy burden to consider. Think of the cost of this single syntax error. For 14 centuries, men have felt divinely entitled to raise their hands to their partners. And for 14 centuries, women have been told by their imams and their families that their bruising is a form of worship, or at least a form of deserved divine correction.
Green skin under a green veil, broken bones, broken spirits, generations of silent suffering. All justified by a single word in a dictionary that someone, somewhere, a long time ago, chose to translate as beat instead of leave.
And that is why this isn't just an abstract intellectual exercise. It's not just about debugging a text, it's about justice. Ahmed's work suggests that the patch for this horrific bug was there the whole time. It was sitting right there in the lexicon. Dharb means separate, quantitat means devout to God, Diraja is about biology. The clues were never hidden.
But we didn't look. Or, more accurately, we trusted the bearded mullahs, as Ahmed so bluntly calls them, to look for us. We outsourced our thinking.
And that is the responsibility that this kind of analysis leaves us with. It's a call to action. We cannot be passive users of any operating system, especially a spiritual one. We can't just accept ancestral obedience because it's easier. We have to be willing to open the books ourselves. We have to check the syntax, because we don't, we might be running a corrupted version of justice that ends up harming the very people it was designed to protect.
It really makes you wonder, I mean, if we as a civilization, as a religious tradition, got this one word so catastrophically wrong for so long and with such devastating consequences.
What else?
Exactly. What other glitches are we currently living with and accepting as absolute truth right now? What other divine commands are actually just typos in our understanding?
And that is the provocative question to leave with. If a single word can be weaponized to oppress half of the human race for a millennium, what other critical errors are we blind to simply because we haven't bothered to go back and check the dictionary?
Something to keep you awake at night, and maybe something to fuel your own investigation.
Indeed. The system, it turns out, requires constant vigilance from its users.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the syntax of justice. We'll see you next time.